Hey guys, welcome back to another weekly astrology. Today we're going to be looking at the astrology of November 30th to December 6th of 2021. My name's David. I'm your astrologer from HC Astrology. Thanks for being here. Thanks for all your support, liking, commenting, subscribing, and sharing these videos. It all means a lot to me and goes a super long way. So as you can see, I was not around for last week, and hope everyone has been doing all right through this eclipse season. And I just kind of took advantage of some of the lighter astrology last week and gave myself a break. Last week was a little bit softer than the week before. Still, it's eclipse season, so things are going to be naturally a little bit more hectic in general. And for me, it just didn't make sense to do a video last week. We're also kind of witnessing this week past the results of that Mars-Uranus opposition, which looks a lot like that new variant that came out. So going to do things a little bit differently this week too. Instead of doing every single transit along the way, I'm going to just look at the overview, and then we're going to be mostly focusing on the Sagittarius eclipse that's going to be happening this week. But like I said, I'll go over the overview a bit, and you can always go back to the overview if you want to see what else is going on. Otherwise, if you're looking to book a consultation with me before the year is up, head over to my website to book services using my scheduler system. I am still offering this special holiday sale that's going to go until the end of the year. And you can just book a full chart reading for the cost of a basic reading. You basically save €50 and you get that extra 30 minutes. And so yeah, the discount's going to only last till the end of the year, but you can also just book now for something in the new year if you want to redeem that discount. Just go in and book it now rather than waiting till later and then you don't get the discount. And just when you do the booking, just mention that you're looking for that. And yeah, another update, I'm going to be traveling again soon. So that may create some blips in my weekly reports. I don't know if I'm going to be able to have time to do it next week. If I do, I'm going to do my best. But I will just keep trying to send these out as I can. If not, maybe some blog posts. If not, do something like this, focus on a main transit for the week. Anyway, so that's kind of it for the updates. Just one last thing. I am in the midst of setting up a Patreon account, and you'll be able to sign up for that for different tiers and different benefits from those, including some monthly horoscopes and forecasts. So I'll let everybody know once that's set up, more information on that in the coming weeks. So let's take a look at the astrology for this week. I'm just going to move some stuff over here. Okay. My annotator out. Okay, so this week is a little bit lighter astrology than especially since 2 weeks prior, and even since last week. I mean, we have the eclipse this week. That's probably the most intense thing, but we're going to see that play out over the coming weeks, and I'm going to break that down why later. But usually eclipses take some time to break out. Sometimes they suddenly show what's going to happen right away, or it takes, a week or two before you see the results of those eclipses. So like the last one, we saw some of the results of that Taurus eclipse combined with that Mars-Uranus opposition kind of manifesting last week rather than maybe the weeks before and things like that. Of course, we see little things come up and more intensities, but the kind of big results of it, what shows, may not show up until a little bit later. So kind of the main things to look over this week, like I said, it's a bit lighter astrology. So we got Mercury's going to sextile with Saturn today or on Tuesday. So I'm reading this from the 9th, but the 29th. But so on Tuesday, November 30th, Mercury's going to sextile with Saturn. Venus is going to sextile with Neptune. So could be just better way to find common ground, better way to connect with things. Communications about maybe serious matters are going to be more fluid. And also there'll be ways of maybe finding some romance and some escape, some kind of relief from some of the heavier things going on Tuesday. And then we also get the sun's going to sextile with Saturn. I think that's just kind of further emphasizing what that Mercury sextile is about, but it's kind of in our story, maybe some of the blockages we've been feeling, the delays, some of the setbacks. There might be some ways to find common ground, find some adjustments in our story, how we can kind of move things forward, how we can progress rather than feeling like everything's a setback. But one of the kind of big things this week is that Neptune's going to station direct. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that before I get into the eclipse, but I just wanted to point that out, that that's also on the first, and any kind of Neptune transits this week are really going to be intensified by that. Otherwise, moving on. Yeah, and then kind of the big thing I'm going to talk about mostly during this video is that Sag eclipse happening on the 4th. So it's a solar eclipse, and it's in Sagittarius at 12 degrees of Sag. So if you know your chart and you know if you have any placements, especially in Sagittarius or Gemini, but mostly in Sag, if you have them around 12 degrees of Sagittarius, within 3 degrees of that, this is going to be hitting that pretty hard. And yeah, you can also look at things that are squaring it, but mostly it's about the conjunction, maybe the opposition. And then last thing is that Mars is going to be sextile with Pluto. So it may be that we may be able to take some action or find some new energy, some new drive in order to deal with some fears we've been having, some of that deeper, darker stuff that's been kind of getting at us, maybe eating away at us. We haven't had a chance to release some of it. With Mars sextiling to Pluto rather than making a square, it won't feel as forceful. There'll be some like mediation, some common ground, a way of making an adjustment to how maybe we've been forcing things in the last bit, especially since Mars has been Scorpio. Some of the more kind of tenser or vigilant or kind of aggravated impulses be able to find some common ground with some of the fears, some of the darker, deeper things, some of that pent up stuff that hasn't had a chance to release fully. And maybe with that Mars sextile Pluto, it may have a better chance to release, maybe, you know, connecting with a masculine figure of some kind and letting something out that's needed to be let out. You know, sometimes it can be kind of dark and scary at first, but in the end, it's very transformative, somewhat cathartic. And I think that's going to kind of close up the whole week on some levels. There might be this kind of release of some kind. Okay, so I'm going to take down the overview, and we can I'm going to just mostly just look, before I get into the eclipse, look at that Neptune station. So Neptune station directs on Wednesday, December 4th. Oh, by the way, you know, if for anyone who's first coming into my videos, I read them from wherever I am at the time. At this present moment, I'm in my studio in Berlin, Germany. And I read the kind of background astrology. It's the mundane astrology, the, you know, whatever's going on in the background. Doesn't necessarily apply to everyone specifically. You have to know your chart a little bit better, but it's more like the background noise, the mundane stuff. And, you know, I read it from Berlin, Germany, but really you can read the transits from anywhere. It's all it's going to do is change the time. You can think about it as a world clock. The astrology is all still the same. It just may take place at different times. So that's something I just need to point out to anyone who's new here. Okay, so Neptune station's direct, and like anytime a station happens, retrograde or direct, it's going to like intensify some of the significations of a planet. So Neptune significations kind of include confusion, fogginess, uncertainty, fantasy, oceanic escapism on some level, and like a disillusionment of some kind. There's also kind of a soothing quality to Neptune, a kind of oceanic soothing quality. I think that's what I meant by that escapism. So this may be like that intensity of indulging in media or indulging in kind of things that give us pleasure or escape on some level. These might get intensified a bit. And I think anyone who has anything at the mutable signs or the double-bodied signs, so Pisces, Gemini, Virgo, or Sag, anything around 20 degrees of that is going to be further intensified. So it's something to pay attention to if you know your chart. So somehow this is a bit of a lower tempo event than some of the other things going on. It's something that is kind of prompting maybe for a yearning or for something other than what we've been getting the last weeks. Since this has been a bit of an intense month for astrology and in the world, I guess, which means this intensification of Neptune feels very much like maybe a soothing wave or balm or relief or of some kind, but it could also be some sort of like intolerance for reality as it is right now. And there may be kind of this avoidance and escapism quality to that intolerance. So likely it's somewhere in between these two poles of, something very avoidant, but then something very relieving. And it's unlikely that anything from Neptune is going to produce any real like significant change to what we've been experiencing thus far. But it is this kind of weird solution of sorts that offers us maybe a temporary escape from the harder things happening. And to come back to the table once we get that kind of relief, maybe with more mellowness or a little bit more chilled out of an approach. So you can kind of think of this as a bit of spa treatment or a retreat of some kind. Still, I think it's important to be mindful of that Neptune significations are getting intensified. Since Neptune has this kind of nebulousness and desire for escape, which can be closely associated with things like addiction or drug taking. So I would suggest taking stock on where one stands with their substance usage at this time. One wouldn't want to end up in the hospital just because they wanted to submerge themselves from troubles of the everyday, especially now that when the winter is kind of fast approaching and the scale of events taking place are feeling on par to those we experienced maybe last year's winter as well, and also the winter before that. So this is not a very tense transit. Like I said, this is going to be the kind of intense transit for this week is the eclipse that perfects on Saturday. This is more of like a tune out. This is like tune off, Netflix on, teas and face masks kind of transit. So if you can take advantage of this easygoingness of Neptune's intensifications, it's also great for any kind of spiritual work you want to do. Meditation of any kind is really going to be heightened and intensified now. You may find that any kind of work you're doing spiritually might have a lot more transcendental qualities to it. So give yourself a break if you can, since you probably need it right now. And what I like about this Neptune direct station is that it feels very much like the relaxing into and releasing from the intensity that was kind of November 2021. And that's going to kind of be emphasized even more by the eclipse that's going to take place. And now, we're getting ready for December, and, there's still this winter to come, but at least the hardest month of 2021 is kind of behind us. So we can kind of focus on getting through the winter now, which, although looks still challenging, is definitely going to be manageable compared to maybe last year or the year before that, especially last year, I would say. And, there's this end in sight on some level. So that's it for my breakdown of the Neptune station. So I'm going to bring up actually a chart for the eclipse, and we can kind of talk about that in general. So this is the eclipse here. Hold on. I'm going to take out some of the things going on here. There we go. So the moon just within Friday into Saturday morning here in Germany, at least, but, Friday into Saturday, wherever you are, the moon kind of moved in to Sag and perfect that conjunction, is now perfecting the conjunction with the sun. So this brings us a new moon, but it also signals the last of the Sagittarius Gemini eclipses. And this is going to close up a 1.5 year cycle between those two signs, between Gemini and Sag, since this is where the nodes have been for the last 1.5 years. Also, I should mention, I use the mean nodes. I don't use the true nodes. So if it says total solar eclipse and you're used to the mean nodes and it says like a partial or something like that, just so that I use the mean nodes, not the true nodes. So, right. So it's closing up the cycle between those two signs. And this eclipse also happens at the 12th degree of, keep those circles on, 12th degree of Sagittarius. So it's important to note anything in your chart that the eclipse will be conjoining to get a better sense of whether or not this eclipse will signal anything especially significant or particular to you in your chart. So if you know where Sag is in your chart, and if you have any personal planets or planetary placements in Sagittarius, and it's getting hit by that 12-degree eclipse, this may intensify things for you. And you can kind of, especially within that 0-degree range, but anything within 3-degree range, that's going to be pretty intense. So before I get into my interpretation of the eclipse, it's good to go over some of the basics of identifying what this eclipse is and an eclipse in general. So firstly, it's a solar eclipse, which means that the moon is conjoining the sun near one of the nodes of the moon. And the nodes are these symbols here, and they kind of look like headphones or horseshoes or something like that. So, and specifically, this eclipse is happening near the south node. So both these points are letting us know about the quality, the fact that it's a solar eclipse, so the moon conjoining the sun, and it's near the south node. And it's giving us an idea of some of the quality of the energy of this eclipse that we're going to be dealing with, specifically that of solar themes being eclipsed and the decreasing nature of the south node. And that we can kind of think of this eclipse as being a temporary blockage of the light of the sun. And so there's this kind of reversal to the status quo, or a disruption to the way things are typically going, since the sun kind of represents that day-to-day status quo, things going on, moving forward, time passing kind of thing. Or like the course being taken thus far, it may be getting changed. And what we're used to seeing, since the sun and the moon represent illumination, and one's illumination is of the night, one's illumination is of the day, the illumination of this eclipse is getting changed, since one is going to be blocking the other. So daytime conscious everyday light is being dimmed or blocked, rendering our usual senses as temporarily unavailable or off or altered on some level. It's kind of like it's like, when you get, you go into a dark space after being a light space, and it takes your eyes a bit of time to adjust. It's kind of like that. In general, eclipses have a releasing or enriching quality to them. And with this eclipse happening so close to the south node, it's likely that the releasing is intensified, since the south node has a lot to do with letting go, detangling. There's a quality of loss or decay with the south node, where like there's an otherworldly escape that's taking place. And it's kind of, like I said, being kind of intensified by that Neptune station that happened a couple days prior. And something is passing through the life right now, brought on by the opening of a door rather than the closing of a door, which would be more like a closing would be more of a lunar eclipse in sense of signification, which I kind of talked about a couple weeks ago. So like I said, this will be the last of a series of eclipses that have happened between the signs of Sagittarius and Gemini, which would have started with a lunar eclipse that happened in Sagittarius during the spring of 2020, basically the 5th of June, 2020. And since this eclipse has that decreasing nature of the south node, there's something about this particular eclipse that signals the ending of something that was started, that has something to do, something that was started back in June of 2020. And that has something to do with this longer process of release, letting go, purging out, and detangling, as it has to do with our Sagittarius part of life. Now, because the south node, called Ketu in Vedic astrology, is associated with the tail of the dragon, or the headless body of the Apsara Rahu, there's something about this formlessness, shadowiness, or unhingedness of the south node that lends itself to being of a very kind of spiritual or otherworldly nature. I've heard it also compared to the nature of Saturn on some level, or a kind of 12th house nature. So that means there's a kind of philosophical or perspective shifting nature to this eclipse, because it's happening in Sag, and Sag is a Jupiter ruled sign, which has a lot to do with like worldview, perspective, philosophy, ideas of the the greater whole. And likewise, that the eclipse is happening in Sagittarius, like I said, it's Jupiter ruled, philosophical, high-minded perspective. This idea of changing perspective is intensified as we are releasing ourselves of old ways of seeing ourselves and the world. Also, since it's a solar eclipse, there's something about solar themes that are being altered, especially in terms of what goals mean to us right now, what ambitions mean to us, and about how we've been writing the story thus far, and how maybe this also needs to change. It means that we're maybe even taking action, or doors are opening to changing the way the story is being written. The chapter is about to end, and something we're going to do is making that chapter end. So it's a major shift of perspective coupled with an urge to take action on how to move forward, to make a move towards how we can release ourselves of what has come before in the story, right? And how the story moving forward may need to change, that our perspective needs to change. So this is a very inspiring solar eclipse, one that is also going to be planting some kind of seed for a longer cycle, a 1.5 year cycle, or longer, because this is the last eclipse in Sag. So it may even be a full 8-9 year cycle until we see that seed really take some sort of fruition. So we can think about it as like planting a seed really deep in the woods, somewhere where we're not going to see it for a long time, that at the moment is not seen clearly too, but that is maybe imagined and visualized about, which could come into fruition over a very long period, over a new chapter being written. Furthermore, I think it's important to look at what's happening to the ruler of this eclipse, which is Jupiter. And Jupiter is on its way out of Aquarius at this time. Oops, that's maybe not such a good arrow. Yeah, Jupiter is going this way towards Pisces. I mean, we've already saw Jupiter in Pisces earlier in the year, and now we're going to see that come into full bloom by 2022. So Jupiter's on its way out the door of Aquarius, and it's nearing the end of its own cycle and story that has been a Saturnian one since Jupiter entered Capricorn back in 2019. And then coupled with the start of this Sagittarius eclipses in spring of 2020, we see that there's something coming to an end. So Jupiter is about to make a full shift into its watery domicile Pisces only a few weeks later from this eclipse on the 29th of December, 2021. And that's going to really signal, and it signals to me that the solar eclipse happening now is really kind of a foreshadow to a big end of a cycle, a chapter, or even a book is coming to an end. Now, what makes this eclipse slightly troubling on some level is that Mars is also engaging with a square, an overcoming square to Jupiter, and that's going to be perfecting next week. I'm going to talk more about that next week's video if I make it, or I might do a blog post or something. So let's see. But yeah, Mars is engaging in a superior square with Jupiter. So remember, Mars is in this more dominant position, has a lot of power being in Scorpio, has been poking and prodding and provoking things its own way, trying to get its word in. We've been seeing this a lot in the news, counter arguments and counter forces kind of pushing and prodding things where really, we're trying to keep things together, trying to unify things. So Mars is engaging in that superior square, which means that Mars on some level is interfering. It's causing trouble, provoking problems, heating things up in ways that Jupiter may not be wanting to deal with right now, especially because Jupiter is kind of full steam ahead to get out of Aquarius. So on one level, I think although this eclipse is signaling a big and significant changes, releases, with Mars in the mix, it also suggests that there's other parties involved that may demand a seat at the table, which may or may not mean we have to make adjustments to our plans that we do not necessarily want to be making at this time. It may just be that kind of wrench in the cogs. Also, some extra layers to add. is that Mars is kind of pushing and prodding by a square, which also is an aspect that is the nature of Mars. So there's a forcefulness that's being input onto what is happening right in this whole eclipse process, this whole story change, this whole rewriting of things, this whole moving forward, which, may mean that, the bigger picture plans we're making, the thing we're writing anew that we're releasing is going to have to include some things we do not necessarily want to include in it, or it may mean that we have to put something down in order to focus right now on what it is we want to be doing. We have to make priorities in order to deal with the things that may feel like they're kind of an interference on our plans on some level. And to get an idea of when we can see like real activations of all this, we can actually look forward to when Mars is going to hit that 12th degree. And some astrologers now, this is like the first time I'm kind of doing something like this. Some astrologers look to Mars at the eclipses. And when Mars hits those eclipse degrees that happened, that's kind of a trigger point because Mars, kind of represents triggers. So Mars is going to hit that degree, the 12th degree, around the 31st of December. Excuse me, the 31st of December, which, is only a couple days after Jupiter leaves Aquarius. So this is another way of seeing how this story might play out. You know what I mean? Like Jupiter leaves Aquarius, and then Mars hits something and activates something, right? And then Mars is also in that, again, by sign, a superior square to Jupiter. So there's something about Mars's inflammatory or combustible nature, pushing and prodding, doing something we don't necessarily want to deal with right now. That's going to be provoking things again. It's going to be triggering things, going to be setting something off. And that's going to be in the heat of that Venus retrograde, which next week, Venus is going to be conjoining with Pluto. And I'll talk a little bit about that later when I close up the video. But yeah, Venus is getting ready for that retrograde. And next week is when it does the first conjunction with Pluto. So things are really intensifying. And if we can remember also, Venus is the exaltation lord of Pisces, which kind of further brings in that Mars square Jupiter story that I'm kind of talking about. So to wrap this up a bit, to give you a better idea of how this may affect you personally, again, look to where you have Sagittarius in your birth chart. What house does Sagittarius occupy? And, the topical significations of that house will be what's going through this process of change, a change of perspective, and the beginning of a new chapter that means the release of an old one. With all that said, give some deeper contemplation to this eclipse. What was started a year and a half ago for you that is now coming to an end on some level? What story is about to change? And in what ways about you, in what ways are you about to write the next chapter that means releasing yourself of an old perspective or worldview? So I think it's time to contemplate. Begin to visualize how you want to begin writing the next story, which is going to be a Scorpio-Taurus story. And how that's been a process of release since spring of 2020, because this is the part of the chart where, especially Sagittarius, this is a part of the chart where we want to have inspiration. We want to have adventure. We want to have optimism and redemption. So there's been something in your life that's been missing on that level, that's felt lacking or dragging in terms of that adventure and inspiration that this Sagittarius solar eclipse will make for an excellent time to take action towards cutting from the past and making the changes for the future so that those lacks are kind of detangled from, released, so that stability maintains in this part of our Sagittarius and Gemini life for the next nodal cycle to take place. So it's going to take another 8-9 years for the nodes to get to Sag and Gemini again. Of course, it will be the North node in Sag, South node in Gemini, but it's going to take a whole kind of 18-year cycle for them to go all the way around. So that's really the big process that's going on here. Of course, the nodes are going to be changing signs. We're going to have new stories being written, new circumstances being changed in our Scorpio and Taurus parts of life. We may have already felt that with that Taurus eclipse that happened 2 weeks prior. But now we're coming to the end of a big story that's been happening between Gemini and Sag over the last year and a half. And that's going to kind of like solidify on some level, or it's going to work the way it's going to work for the next 8-year cycle. So there's a new sense of illumination on what to do moving forward and where to find adventure, and to bring back into our lives more excitement and wonder. So I feel pretty good about this Sagittarius eclipse. It's going to be intense like all the eclipses, and kind of hectic and crazy, but we're making new decisions. We're making big changes. We're setting a story to play out for the next lunar node cycle in that part of our life. So like I said, I'm changing it up a bit this week. It's going to be a bit quicker, dirty. But I think that, with everything going on right now, it's good for us to kind of move on to the next chapter. We got to set priorities. We got to do what needs to be done. And for me right now, the main priority is just talking about that eclipse and moving on to other things because, got a lot to do right now. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about next week. Next week's a little bit more intense astrology again. There's a lot more kind of harsher transits happening. Some that we've experienced before, such as Mercury square Neptune, which can always be very confusing for conversations and messages, maybe even travel exchanges. So just be aware that some things in the market might feel really confusing moving forward, or also not really based in reality. So just keep that in mind. And then we get that Mars squares Jupiter, which, the last one we had was pretty intense. I'm going to talk about that, but usually, Mars is a trigger, Jupiter is the planet of expansion. So something about a big boom on some level. So keep that in mind. And I'll kind of talk a little bit about the Mars Jupiter opposition that happened earlier in the year when Mars is in Leo, and then also that Mars Jupiter square that happened when Mars was in Taurus at the beginning of 2021. Otherwise, then we got that first conjunction of Venus with Pluto. So this really signals to us that we're getting right into the Venus retrograde cycle that's about to come up. So, maybe we may get that first dose in Venus ruled topics of relationship, of aesthetic, of balance, harmony, that's going to be intensified. Something's kind of dark and mucky that needs to be kind of brought up to the surface in that process. So we're going to get that first dose of it. We're going to kind of walk into the dark chamber by next week. Sun's going to square Neptune. I think that kind of further emphasized things with that Mercury square. And then at the very end of that whole report, which will be for me kind of Monday, Tuesday, the following week, Mars is going to ingress Sagittarius, and then Mercury ingresses Capricorn. So that's it for this week's astrology. I hope that was helpful to everyone. I hope everyone's been doing well through this eclipse season, then getting ready for the winter, doing whatever needs to be done to make oneself available for that. I'm going to keep trying to do these videos as we go. Again, if you want to book a consultation with me, I still have this discount going on to the end of the year. You can even book now for later in the year and just say that you want the discount and you can still get it. So keep that in mind. Just head over to my website, go to my scheduler system, look for where there's dates available. At the moment, I'm pretty booked up for the next couple of weeks, but check it out. I'm sure there's something in there for you. And if you need to figure something out, maybe later long-term, just shoot me an email and we'll figure something out. All right, everybody. Wishing you all the best this week. Keep coming back, and bye for now.